collective unconscious that Jung talked about, where there's a desire for the spirit in every culture, and quite often there's this symbology that's used that uses sacrifice or has the sacrificial animal, or in some cases human sacrifices, a part of that belief system. And I think that's because humans sort of, recognize that, or have been taught by God in their own cultures of the need for this mysterious recognition and acceptance of the place of sacrifice in spiritual living. And Jesus comes in as, to make it very plain. Yes, all of this is true. That's why I'm here, to be that sacrifice. And people ask, well, why do you need that? Well, that's the great mystery. I'm not sure. Other than, as far as tying into the Old Testament, I mean, clearly you have, such a history there of the Jewish experience of using the spilling of blood to cover sins, and Jesus coming in as an acceptable sacrifice for those sacrifices. The old needed to be by, an unblemished animal. Jesus comes in as an unblemished human, and now instead of just covering sins, he washes them completely away for anyone who would accept his position. And I think that's really the key, that's the key difference between Jesus and these other spiritual leaders. But he also gave us evidence of his supremacy because of his impact, the martyrdoms, the conversion of several countries and peoples thereafter, the miracles we continue to see today, and the overwhelming change that we see that comes in the spirit of someone who becomes a Christian. So there we have prophecies, his impact, and sacrifice. Now, let's talk about resurrection. Now this one's going to surprise you a little. Or maybe not. Someone who's been watching the show a lot called me over this past week, and he jokingly said that, he refers to tuning into my show as, watching that heretic Frank, something like that. Which I don't take offense at, because I know some of the things I say are heretical. And Jesus certainly was considered a heretic, so I don't mind being in that camp.
Oh yeah, baby.
But what I'm about to say here about the resurrection, some people, would consider heretical. And that is that I don't believe that it's necessary to believe in a bodily resurrection. Now, I know there's places in the Bible where Paul, says that, it's necessary, that you must believe that he was raised physically from the dead. And he could be right. I mean, I could be wrong, and I'm open to being corrected by God. But the reason I'm saying is it's not, because to me, this one is, maybe a stumbling block for a lot of people, and I know that Jesus is supposed to be a stumbling block. He's supposed to be, the buck stops there with him. You either buy who he is and receive, or you don't buy it and you don't receive. But I think the bodily resurrection is unnecessarily considered part of that stumbling block, because even if, Jesus came to sacrificially offer himself for the world's sin, and then ascended to God in the Spirit the way all of us hopefully will, or transformed into the next realm, however you want to look at it, I'm fine with that. I mean, he came as a man, he died as a man, he's reunited with God after death, the way we hope to be. What's wrong with that? And even if, even some scriptures where, Jesus even predicts him being raised after his death, I don't think he says necessarily, he'll be physically raised. He says he will be raised. He will be raised. What is the essence of him? His body? No. It's his spirit, his soul, who he is eternally, which is formless.
Oh yeah, baby.
Is raised.
Preach it, honey.
I know he gave an example. It said, talk about the temple. This temple will be, destroyed, and it'll be, raised in 3 days. Well, still, I think you could, speaking of himself metaphorically, as the temple. But it's still in the same way. I still think you still can have Christ as Lord, Christ as Lamb of God, and ascending into the higher realms, united with God, in the same way you and I will be. And if this bodily resurrection was so necessary, then all the people who've been cremated are in tough shape. No, God's not raising bones, right? He's not raising bones, so that's the difference. But anyway, so in that sense, I guess in that sense, I'm really not saying he's that much different than Buddhists or Hindus, because I know, Buddhists believe in reincarnation. I guess Hindus do too. I think there's more worship of God in Hinduism, so they might have this idea of reuniting with God and the Spirit, which is similar to Christians, that Buddhists don't, because they have a reincarnation idea, and that once you're done perfecting yourself, then you don't need to return. But I think they present that in a way that's sort of, you become one with consciousness, and it's kind of less personal than, a creator God, Lamb of God, reunited with the family, the spirit of those who went before us, and instead, becoming just part of a corporate consciousness.
Preach it, honey.
That's interesting there, because I guess what I'm saying is there's more evidence to me that Jesus' lordship in the prophecies, his impact, and historically the fact that he died as a sacrificial lamb, than there is in me believing he was bodily raised. I have no evidence for that. I do have evidence of him fulfilling prophecy. I do have evidence of the impact he had on martyrs and world conversion.
Preach it, honey.
And the physical and spiritual miracles that occur in his name. I do have evidence that he came and specifically spoke of himself as the sacrificial lamb that had to be slaughtered, that's why he came into the world.
Oh yeah, baby.
I don't have evidence that he was bodily raised. So, some of you might say, well, how could you, like I think Paul even says in one somewhere, he says something like, if Christ wasn't raised, then a Christian, myself and Christians are the most foolish of people, that we would believe in someone who wasn't raised. Well, I'm saying he was raised, it's just not necessarily bodily, and I don't see the problem with that. So, yes, I do have my differences with Paul, although there are not many of them, and I have great respect for him, and his words,
Oh yeah, baby.
to me, quite often ring with the resonance of the eternal voice. But some things he says sort of strike me as his own thinking, and sometimes as a result of the culture he was in. For instance, saying women shouldn't